Okay, I think we are done. Yes, and I see there is Kristen and Andre and Wouter, who is also checking in from with on behalf of Iris, who is in another part of the house. So, hello everybody, and hello all the rest of you. This is Tad, or I am Tad, or I was Tad when I got up this morning, and the various laws of physics probably suggest I still am Tad. I think so. I think that objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Objects that wake up old and tired tend to stay old and tired. And I'm in one of those categories somewhere, or all of them, maybe. Um, but anyway, so hi, nice to see you. Very good to see all of you. Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you. I am going to be reading from the Witchwood Crown in just a while, but I thought first I might see if I can manage to actually handle some. Come here. There we go. See if we can get some actual comments or questions or whatever. I see. Hello, there's Katya and Tash and Timothy. Good to see you all. And let me see what else I've got here. And then Mark checked in. And good to see you all. Let me see who else we got. Okay, Petra. Timothy, I already said hello to. But hello, Petra. Jeremy, hello, buddy. Thinking about you a lot this last few days. Good to see you. And come back. There's my mother-in-law, Hazel. Hello, sweetie. Your daughter is fine. In fact, she's in pretty fine fettle because we've found, or the kids have found, two of the kids have found an apartment for themselves. So we're all very pleased about that, that we're actually going to be able to move them out somewhere. Who else have I not said hello to? Rosalba and Isaac. Suzanne Owen and Maria Henschke. Whoops. And who else? Cliff. Hello, Cliff. Good to see you. And Chris Fab, my old friend and helper, who has done so much to get these broadcasts out available in other places. Dirk, good to see you. And Wouter, I already said hello to. And Christy, and the familiar four more, which I never know what that means. Well, there's one of them, Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Good to see you. So anyway, I see Andre asks, how quickly do you write and do you think much while doing the actual writing? Yeah, I do a lot of thinking while doing the actual writing, but I also am a writer who finds that it works best for me if I do a lot of my thinking first. So for instance, today I did a sort of normal day's work, which was about 7 pages, but I must have spent an hour and a half or 2 hours because I'm here's the thing, and I will talk about Other Land and that other stuff in just a moment, but here's the thing about the Ordinary Farm books, the third Ordinary Farm books. The main thing is there is a time shift thing. There is time travel. And the thing about time travel, even if you're writing it for an all ages book, I treat an all ages book like any other book. I don't write down to a younger audience. Neither did Deb when she was doing the first draft. What I will occasionally do is make things a little shorter, make things happen a little faster, and try not to use some of my most obtuse words, because I'm a word guy. I love words. So I'll try not to get too far afield with some of my word choices in a way that I would writing for a purely adult audience. But other than that, I just approach it like any other book. So I take the time travel stuff and the paradoxes that are inherent in that very seriously, the same way I would if I was writing an adult science fiction novel. So it's if you haven't written a time travel story, especially one like this, which has got multiple strands, and plus I'm coming to the last part, which is where a lot of things have to be explained and other things have to happen, that will push the plot forward, and you've got time travel in it, especially when this is the third book and you've had a lot of other facts established in earlier books without necessarily ever reconciling an exact time stream. And so that's happening now. As a result, I'm doing a huge amount of trying to figure out different ways that things could have happened this way, and different ways that characters can travel without bumping into each other, or with bumping into each other if they need to, but still having it make sense and seem part of the what's normal, and that it's reasonable, I guess would be a better word, that whatever you're trying to create, and this is always true in fiction, and it's always especially true in the kind of fiction that I'm writing, which for lack of a better word we'll call it sort of fantastic adventure fiction. So there's even more of a compulsion to get things right. But also there's a lot of facts involved, even if they're made up facts. Once you've established them, they're established, and you have to respect them. You cannot simply pull a MacGuffin out of your back pocket at the last moment and say, oh, but they had this all along, but they didn't realize it was a super powerful thing. That's the kind of bad writing that, it makes a genre bottom heavy, basically, for lack of a better word. And I think any book, whether a genre novel or not, has to be written to the best of one's ability. And I am a reader of many kinds of fiction, so I don't just read science fiction or fantasy or whatever and say, well, if I can make it as good as that. When I'm comparing myself, I'm comparing myself to the writers I really admire. And some of them are fantasy and science fiction writers, and some of them are not. But anyway, long roundabout way of saying that I do have to spend a lot of time sometimes thinking. And today's was one of those, because my characters are venturing into what in the Ordinary Farm series is called the Fault Line, which is actually a place where you can physically travel into the past. And as a result, nearly anything would be possible, but it all has to make sense. And it has to make sense within the context of the book, but also within the context of what most people would think, like, does that seem like something somebody would do, etc. So on a day like today, yeah, I spent a good 2+ hours just lying around staring up at the ceiling, oftentimes listening to quiet music and to kind of mask the sounds, trying to think of every different possible way this could be arranged to get the results that I want without violating what I feel is reality within this unreal universe that we've created. Anyway, so that said, I hope that answers your question, Andre. Oh, Pavel. Hello, Pavel. Good to see you. A pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining us. Gregory says, wow, this is live. Yeah, this is actually live. I don't know where you are, Gregory. It's 1:08 where I am. And it's the middle of the night here in California, but it's a middle of the night I'm fairly comfortable with. So, because I'm a late night person by nature. I tend to stay up till 3:30. I try to get up like somewhere between 9:30 and 10:30. And that's kind of how my schedule works. And I like the quiet at night. Anyway, I'm skipping around the large and strange and unusual subject of the announcement that we wound up making, do I ever sign books? Oh, Gregory also asked, do you ever sign books at local bookstores? Yes, but I haven't. It depends on where local is for you. So yes, I certainly do. And things like that are not unusual. But I haven't. I'll be doing signings next, earlier than this, but this somewhere around the late fall next year, I'll be doing probably a lot of signings for The Navigator's Children when it comes out. And of course, as usual, I will sign anything that people bring. It doesn't have to be that book only. Anyway, hi, Winter. I see you too. Nice to have you with me. And Kristen, hello. I'm sure you're not the only one in the world, but I'm not sure what you're referring to in this case. Gregory says he's in San Francisco, and I think you are in Santa Cruz. I am going to be in Santa Cruz in another couple of months at the most. We're currently on the other side of the hills, but we're moving back to the Santa Cruz area. And Maya just checked in. Hello, Maya. Oh, Night Owl. Gotcha, Kristen. Okay. Yes, I'm definitely a night owl. Maya just checked in, and yes, I do finish my stories. That is one thing I always wonder. Is it seems like it would be something that would be more important to readers than it seems to be, because I know two of the other real leading lights in the field, both of whom are people I like very much, haven't finished their series in years, and I've finished several of them. So, not to brag, it's just a fact. It's just the way I work, and part of that is because I know how they're going to end before I start them, or at least I have some idea. Anyway, back to the TV news. That came as a bit of a surprise to us too. Not that we didn't know about the TV adaptation plans. And mind you, I will say here, this is early days. This is early days. We're in the early stages of production. We have been working on it as a possibility since before the pandemic. And the pandemic, as with so many things, kicked a huge hole into all kinds of plans, and basically put everything on hold for most of 2 years. And then various other things have happened, and of course the writers' strike, which affected a lot of film and television business. That, for those of you who are outside the States, that was the writers' strike in Hollywood. So it was primarily screenwriters. But screenwriters, producers, etc., are exactly the people that we're looking for. I am not going to write an entire miniseries. Although I will be, if it comes off, again, early days, I hasten to say, if it comes off, I will be very involved in the project and have been very involved in all the steps so far, and intend to be kind of like the story editor. So, but back to the announcement, which was a surprise. It was a surprise. And it was some kind of a glitch happened in the system, which I hope is not indicative of anything. But superstitious me, you know. But anyway, where they forgot to inform us, or somebody forgot to inform us they were making that announcement. And I'm telling you that because my longtime friends and readers know that I would have made a bigger deal of it if I was going to make that announcement. Would have built it up for at least a few days, and maybe, you know. Anyway, so what the announcement itself was about is the fact that the particular gentleman who's going to produce or be a producer, oh bugger, now I lost my thing here. Sorry. The particular gentleman who is going to be producing, who is Mike Weber, who is the smiling picture there, who has been involved with a lot of other stuff, including Wheel of Time, is going to be the executive producer, probably something like that. And this is a big deal for us because this is basically, you know, somebody with experience in the industry, and he's a real good guy from my interactions with him, and smart guy, and seems to get what the books are about and stuff like that there. So that's all good and positive. That part just happened in the last few weeks. We'd been looking around for somebody to kind of fill that role, and Mike was brought on or agreed to come on, or however these things work, I don't know. So that's all just happened fairly recently. And then, as I said, the announcement, though, caught us a bit by surprise, because there was this glitch where we weren't informed before it happened. Now, it's nothing we wanted to hide any longer than we had to. We just probably were expecting to get a little more notice before it got into the trades or whatever. I have no ideas beyond that as to what's going on with it. As I said, it's been something we've been in communication about for quite some time. We signed the contracts a while back. As you can imagine, I would have loved to have been able to talk about this stuff, but you don't do that. in these early stages. And I've learned not to do that. I think I mentioned last week about our tragic Tail Chaser song experience where we had to completely just blow up the deal because it was Saudi Arabian money, and that whole thing went down, and we just had to turn away and walk away from the deal. So because of that, obviously I have a sort of natural tendency to stay quiet about things because I've been doing this for a long time and most things don't turn into anything. Those of you in Germany who know the radio play, that was one of the things that actually worked. And at the beginning of it, I was like, yeah, well, whatever. Yeah, I wish you guys luck, and walked away from meeting the producer of the radio play, the German language radio play, which was 24 hours long. Saying, like, I don't know Walter. He seems like this is the guy who produced it, Walter Adler. I don't know Walter at all, but he seems to have a lot of track record, and he seems like a really smart guy. But I also know how many times people have told me, oh, I'd love to do this with your books. Oh, I'd love to make this. Oh, I want to do a stage play. Oh, we want to make a film, And we'd actually had the option taken on Otherland, an option picked up on Otherland once before, which didn't work out because the higher ups were thinking they were going to make a single movie out of it. And I'm like, really? A book, a series that's like twice as long as The Lord of the Rings, you're going to make a single movie out of it? Yeah, sure. But they paid us some money. So, what can I say? I kind of could tell it wasn't going to happen, but what am I going to say? Don't give me your money and try to make a film based on my books. This seems to be a much more sensible project. And I've always thought that either Otherland or the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn books, or anything of my multi-volume series would be much better as serialized television. So, I think if we can get a minimum of like 4 seasons, one per book, that would be great. I have no idea at this point. Until we sit down and actually start hashing this stuff out, which we haven't done yet, because again, they're raising money, not trying to, they're raising money, they're finding people to do it, and then we're going to get to the more nitty-gritty production chores. However, it's not too early for wild, crazy, speculative fun. So if any of you want to suggest actors that you think would be particularly good, I'm especially interested in, if we get to that point, hear me knock wood, if we get to that point, who we would cast as Dredd is of particular interest to me, and also obviously Rini and Kabu, and there's a lot of interesting characters that be fun. And we used to play this game with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, by the way. Back in the day when everybody that I knew seemed to think it was only a matter of time until Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn got made into something. And to give you an idea of how long ago that's been, those of you who know American film and American film actors, the 2 main leading candidates that we could think of for Simon in those days were Eric Stoltz and Matthew Modine. Matthew Modine, both of whom must be in their late 50s by now. So that was who we were thinking of to play 16-year-old, 15, 16-year-old Simon. So these things often come to nothing. I mean, this has obviously gone quite a bit farther than speculation about, maybe somebody will make a Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. But I'd love to see your suggestions, especially because I don't watch as much TV as a lot of people do. Or I do, but I watch the same stuff over and over again. So, feel free to speculate or, suggest people that you think, oh, you guys should, when the time comes, you should check this person out. Again, very early days in terms of an entire production. I'm that right there. I'm totally down with it. I'm really excited about it if it continues forward. I try not to get too high or too low with anything because, again, experience. And if there's one thing I have at this point, it's experience. Unless you're Neil Gaiman or George R.R. Martin, people are not just going to start throwing money at you and going, yeah, make some stuff for I mean, they will do that for me with books, thank God, but they don't do that for me with TV and film. So that may change. As usual, it would have been much better if, something had made a breakthrough into TV back when I was young and good looking. But you know what? You can't have everything, right? You can't have everything. But it would have been nice to take my hair to an opening night. Anyway, so that's the basic scoop. It's rolling along. There's still a long way to go. Now that the cat is out of the bag, you may have seen my announcement. Cat 1, bag 0. The Now that the cat is out of the bag, I can talk about things as we find things out, or as things are happening, or as we hit certain milestones and things like that. So, still early days, probably months and months and months or longer before any thought of going into actual production. A lot of other work to be done. But after about 3 years of not being able to talk about it, I am very pleased about being able to talk about it and not having to always be saying, well, no news, no, nothing I can talk about, or, it's all speculation, that kind of stuff, which is, that's the only thing I could say. And I hope I will have exciting, fun stories to tell you in the weeks and months ahead. And at least now I can talk about it. So thank you for all the kind words. It's much appreciated. Deb and I have hoped something like this would happen and that it would get to the point where we could start talking about it. We couldn't even tell our friends and relatives, except in a very general way, that we were talking about some of these things. So that's where that's at. All of that said, now let me just go back and check and see if there was anything else anybody had asked that they might want me to answer. Dum-da-dum-bum. Okay. Yes, Katya. Katya asks, it's very interesting to think about how the whole thing will look. Yes, that is one of the major things that we have to work through. And one of the things, obviously, that I talked about when I first started having meetings with the production company, Pt.16, and some of the other people who are going to be involved, was it's been 4 years, Ilva says. Deb told me when I was last with you in 2019. Well, there you go. By the way, Tash says, we eagerly await your cameo. Those of you who've listened to the German version of the radio play, do you know I had a cameo in that? And if so, do you know what it was? And I will take answers in the comments. And if not, I'll tell you. If not tonight, some other time. It's a very short cameo, but I'm in it. Anyway, what else was I going to say? I think that was basically it. I think that's all I was going to talk about. But again, yeah, thank you very much for all the kind words. Becky says, I hope we still get stories about duct tape cars and things. Well, trust me, the ongoing tragedy, the ongoing tragic comedy that is my life and my relationship with my cars and dogs and family is not going to just suddenly come to an end. And as I said, this is years away. Most of these things fail anyway. I mean, this is me you're talking to. I'm not getting my hopes up about anything. I'm going to do whatever I can to try to make it a success. But I am definitely not out spending my TV money. And I am definitely not out, bragging about how I have a TV show. I have a deal to go forward with trying to turn my books into a TV show. And those particular Otherland books. And that's where it's at this moment. So I will keep you informed now, though, because now I can talk about it. And that's good. Okay, anyway, hello to everybody. And hello, Ilva, by the way. I did see you there. As usual, I can't see who's here, and I can only see some of the comments some of the time. All right, let me get back to what I was going to do with the rest of the broadcast, for lack of a better term, which is to read. And we are on chapter 15 of the Witchwood Crown. We have just finished a section where, as I recall, where the Talon, the group of 5, highly trained Norn warriors and etc. have stopped along the way at an outlying Norn fort, Hikedaya Fort, to turn over the bones to what turns out to be Akinabi, the scary bad guy. And in the process of that, they've just found out they're going to be sent somewhere else to do another thing, which is bring back a live dragon. But they have been given a tool to help them, which is a huge, huge giant, the biggest one anybody has ever seen, named Gogamgar. That was the end of the previous chapter. Now we are starting a new chapter. Chapter 15, Atop the Holy Tree. It was a warm day out and a hard climb up hundreds of narrow steps, but Lord Chancellor Passavalis considered it well worth the trouble. I am like a cat, he thought with quiet amusement, always happiest when I can perch in some high place and look down on everything else. He stepped out onto the top of the Tower of the Holy Tree, and his troubled mind was immediately soothed by the cool air swirling in from the Kinslaw. He put his back to the morning sun and peered down from the western side of the tower, but other than an assortment of castle livestock grazing on the green, and castle folk going about their assorted employments, there was little to see. He wondered what those curiously foreshortened men and women would think if they knew they were being watched from on high. Then another thought came to him. Is this what God sees from his high heaven? No wonder he cares so little for us. We are scuttling things. After a while, the sun slipped behind some clouds. Shrouded from the glare, his sweat from the climb now dried, Passavalis began to walk the rectangular tower top, something he did whenever he could find the chance, in search of that cat-like feeling of peace. Holy Tree Tower had been built in the years after the Storm King's War, when the Hayholt's two tallest structures had both become useless. Yeldon's Tower, the squat, brooding cylinder of stone he looked down on now, had been sealed up at the order of the king and queen. And Green Angel Tower, which had soared far above everything else, had collapsed in the final hours of the struggle. A castle without a tower was like a rich man without eyes, a target for thieves and bandits, and so a new tower had been constructed against the wall of the inner keep, a high place where sentries could stand and look over the innermost lands of the king's and queen's protection, the heart of the high ward. Passavalis gazed at the secretive mass of Yeldon's Tower, its premises forbidden to all for many years. Then he continued along the tower battlements until he could look down on the spot where a mighty Green Angel Tower had once stretched to the sky. What a thing it must have been, he thought, to have stood atop it, twice this height or more, and looked out across the world. No cat, no matter how ambitious, could be displeased with such a perch. Even the rubble of Green Angel Tower was long gone, hauled off to rebuild the ruined parts of the castle after the last dreadful battle. All that had remained for many years were the faint marks of its foundations. Now even those were gone, the ground filled and leveled, and foundations laid for a new hall that would become the Royal Library. Lord Tiamak thought a monument to learning would be a fitting use for the place where the Storm King had almost managed to tear open the world and turn it inside out. But Passavalis was not so sure. Learning itself cannot stop destruction or repair its ravages, he thought, suddenly caught up in old sorrows. It can only make certain that you understand how much you have truly lost. He straightened, stretched. Those were not the kind of thoughts he wished to have now. He had carefully, deliberately put those bad days in the past and turned his back on them. He had work to do now, a kingdom to care for. He heard footsteps and voices. The sentries whom he had sent off to find themselves a drink and a late morning meal were climbing the stairs back to their posts. Pasquale took a long breath and tasted rain coming. The king and queen would be back in a few weeks, and there was much to do. Still, he regretted having to descend the stairs, not because of the wearying journey, but because he hated leaving the quiet and isolation of the heights. He had not realized before how lonely it was to rule a kingdom, as he had been doing in the royal couple's absence. And it was lonelier still when you were surrounded by the voices and faces of all the people that wanted something from you. "God give you good day, Lord Chancellor," said the first sentry onto the tower top. His beard was shiny with butter, and crumbs were caught in the sleeves of his hauberk. "Did you have yourself a breath of fresh air?" The second one climbed up behind the first, and they both turned toward him and clutched their pikes in formal salute. "I did," Pasquale said, smiling. "Enjoy the view, men. You do not know it, but you have a better job than mine." As he stepped into the stairwell, he saw the two sentries exchange puzzled looks. Pasquale had climbed many more steps by the time he reached the residence hall of the inner bailey and the bedchamber where he had installed the wounded Scytha. He was given no time to rest, though. Instead of the sentry, who should have been standing guard at the door, two frightened chambermaids huddled there, faces pale as cooked fish, and he could hear men shouting beyond the door. He drew his knife and hurried forward. "What has happened?" he demanded. One of the maids said, "Oh, my lord, she is awake and angry." He sprang past her and threw open the door to discover the even more surprising spectacle of Brother Eitan and an armored Erkenguard wrestling with a naked woman. "What is the meaning of this?" Pasquale shouted. Brother Eitan had several long scratches on his face, and blood dripped from his chin. "She woke and attacked me." He struggled to keep the Scytha's long nails from scoring him again. "Help us, your lordship! By my vow, she is ungodly strong." The guardsman had his arms around the woman's slender waist and was doing his best to hold her down on the bed while she slapped at his helmeted head. Eitan had managed to catch one of her arms, so Pasquale threw himself forward and caught the other. The monk was right. The woman, who had seemed nearly dead only a couple of days earlier, was astonishingly strong, and the sweat that coated her limbs made it difficult to find and hold a grip. At last, Pasquale pushed her arm down onto the mattress and lay atop it, but he could still feel her pulling and twisting beneath him like some powerful serpent of the far southern swamps. "Lady!" he cried. "Lady! You are among friends! Stop fighting us! We will not hurt you!" He turned his head sideways to see her better and was nearly rewarded with the loss of his nose as she bit at him savagely, her teeth snapping shut only a thumb's width from his face. "Redeemer, save us! Is she mad?" he shouted. "Does it matter?" croaked Eitan. The collar of his robe had been pushed halfway over his face, so that he seemed to have shrunk to the size of a child. "Mad, sane, either way she's fierce. Call more guards." But the Scytha, as though Pasquale's words had traveled to her slowly over a long distance, at last began to calm. He risked another look and saw her head sag back, and her astounding golden eyes roll up beneath the lids. She went limp then, and for a moment all four of them, 3 good-sized men and 1 slender woman, lay on the bed, struggling for air together. Pasquale felt something wet and rolled a little to the side to see what it was. "By the Eitan, this is blood! Everywhere! Eitan, is this all yours?" The monk groaned. "It feels like it, Lord Steward, but I fear it's hers. She has reopened the wounds I stitched closed. May God help us. We must close them, or she will bleed to death." Pasquale loosened his grip on her arm to see whether she would resume her struggle, but her pale golden face and limbs had gone slack. He sat up. "Get something to tie her down," he told the guard. "Not rope, something softer. The ties from those curtains." He watched the guardsman hesitate in front of the window, taking off his helmet to peer at the window fittings like a cow ordered to jump a tall fence. "God curse it, man, don't stare!" Pasquale cried. "Rip them down!" The soldier returned with an expression of deep unease on his perspiring face and a curtain tie in each hand. Pasquale snatched them from him, and although she was no longer resisting, tied the Scytha's ankles to the footboard of the bed, pulling the makeshift ropes tight before knotting them. Brother Eitan tilted the upper half of her body onto his side so he could examine her bleeding wounds. She seemed quite insensible now, but Pasquale was not going to rely on this strange creature who only looked like a mortal woman to remain passive for very long. So he sent the bemused guard for ties from the chamber's other set of curtains, then used one to bind her wrists together before dismissing the guard back to his post. The large man all but ran from the room, giving one last wide-eyed look before closing the door. Pasquale would have preferred to tie both the Scytha's arms separately, as he had done with her legs, but he did not want to interfere with Brother Eitan, who was staunching the blood still seeping from her wounds. He sat on the floor and held her bound wrists instead. "What do you think?" "Think? I think I know nothing about the fair folk, Lord Steward. She has lost much blood." The monk shook his head. "As have I. But she had lost far more before she came here, and she survived that." Her nakedness was disconcerting. In repose, she looked much like an ordinary, slender young woman. Pasquale was about to reach down and pull the coverlet up over her lower body when the Scytha woman's eyes fluttered open again. For a moment they seemed to rove, unfixed. Then they narrowed. She tried to fling herself off the bed again, but was hindered by her bound ankles, and only succeeded in bucking off Eitan, who tumbled onto the stone floor on the far side of the bed and cracked his head against the stone flag so loudly that Pasquale could hear it. Meanwhile, it was all Pasquale could do to hold onto the curtain tie knotted around her wrists. She cried out in what he guessed was her Scythy tongue, but the stream of rapid fluid sound meant nothing to him. "Lady!" he cried again as Eitan slowly crawled back onto the bed, a red lump already showing itself above his eye. "Lady, stop! We will not hurt you. You have been wounded, and you must not fight us." It took a moment, but he saw something like understanding pass over her, and her features softened, but she still fought against the restraints. Where are they?" she said in perfectly understandable Westerling. "Where are my things?" "Things? Lady, stop fighting. We mean you nothing ill. Do you mean your saddlebags? We brought them with you. Here, Brother Eitan, they are in the corner. Bring them to her." The monk half ran, half stumbled to the corner, holding his head as though it might come off if he let go. He found the white leather bags and carried them to her. She snatched them away and began to paw through them, despite her wrists being tied together. Pasquale had gone through the bags himself when she had first been brought here, and knew that other than a few small tools, a roll of very strong twine wound from fine hairs, and a carved wooden bowl, they did not contain much. He also could not avoid the sight of her nakedness without looking away altogether, and although Brother Eitan had done just that, Pasquale felt a kind of fascination. The Scytha was slender, long-backed and narrow-hipped, but firm muscles moved beneath her smooth, evenly golden skin, and Pasquale knew as well as anyone could what strength was in them. Her tangled hair was silvery, wet with perspiration and blood. Her face, subtly different from a mortal's, tilted oddly at cheek, forehead, and chin, so that it seemed almost feline. She might have been some heathen goddess of the hunt, running unclothed beneath the moon at the front of a savage pack. Had she been a mortal woman, he would have guessed her to be less than 24 summers old. He was staring at her small breasts, Pasiphalis realized. He felt a sudden clutch of confusion and looked away. "It is not here," the Sitha suddenly wailed. "Is this all you found? Where is Spider Silk? Have you seen him?" Some blood was dribbling anew from the wound in her chest, and Eitan was trying to staunch it with a cloth. "Spider Silk? Who is that? You were alone when we found you. We thought you dead," said Pasiphalis. "My horse, where is he?" "We found no horse. The bags were hung willy-nilly, half hidden in a bush. Doubtless the horse ran, and they caught there." She swayed, then dropped the bags as suddenly as if they had caught fire. She looked at Pasiphalis, and her eyes again were unfixed and confused. He could see that she was now struggling to remain upright. Was there aught else?" "No, my lady, but we will search again if you tell me only what you have lost." She sank back onto the bed and drew one forearm over her eyes, as if she no longer wished to see what surrounded her. "No, I must go there. You are in no fit shape for that." Pasiphalis waved to Eitan to resume binding her wounds. He reached out himself and pulled the coverlet up from the floor and draped it across her lower limbs, then pulled it up to her collarbone and felt a kind of relief when he had done so. Her damp skin seemed to glow like honey in the bright noon light that blazed through the uncurtained windows. She said something in her own tongue that he could not understand. Her voice had become heavy and slow as syrup. She opened her mouth to speak again, but instead her head rolled to one side and her eyes closed. Pasiphalis stared. Is she? "She still lives, God be praised," said Eitan. "But she has cruelly tired herself. And me too, I must say, not to mention nearly breaking my skull. I will bind her wounds again. When you've finished, I will watch her for a while, in case she wakes," Pasiphalis said. "You must rest. But first I will beg a favor of you. It is something I was to do myself, but I have not the heart." Brother Eitan looked as though he would have preferred to be released without more duties, but he only nodded, and from somewhere in his deep weariness pulled up a smile. "Of course, Lord Steward." The monk was a patient old soul in a young body. Pasiphalis decided he would remember that. "You have my gratitude, brother. You must go and wash yourself first, though. Tend your wounds, and put on something less blood-spattered, too. The lady to whom I am sending you, you will not have to fight with." He laughed despite his own great weariness. "Or at least not the kind of fight we have just had. But she may be less than sweet when she finds I have sent you in my place." "As long as she keeps her nails to herself," said Eitan, "I will thank God and be content." He began wearily gathering up his medicaments, which had been scattered widely about the chamber, but stopped to ask, "What of the Sitha lady's possessions from her saddlebag?" "I will gather up those," Pasiphalis said. "You have done enough here, brother." His knock echoed for a while. Brother Eitan waited, then knocked again. At last, a pretty young woman opened the door. "Her Highness is expecting you," she said, but she looked as if he was anything but what had actually been expected. Eitan followed her in. The retiring room was handsomely appointed, draped from high ceilings to floor in tapestries, depicting the famous tale of Sir Talistro of Perdruin. It was many times the size of Eitan's own cell in the monks' dormitory at St. Sutrin's. Princess Idela sat in a tall chair beneath one of the windows, with her sewing on her lap. The sun touched her red hair and made it seem almost a fiery halo. "Your Highness," Eitan said, getting down on his knees and touching his shaved head nearly to the floor. "Your pardon, but Lord Passavalis said that you sought advice on some books belonging to the late prince, your husband. I am Brother Eitan." "Very kind of you, brother. I know you. I have seen you about the palace." But she did not look entirely pleased by the chance to meet him. "And how is our Lord Chancellor? Not ill, I trust?" "No, Princess. Only weary from a long day's labors and still with more duties before him. But he was anxious to send help to you as soon as possible, even if he could not come himself." "Lord Passavalis is too kind." Her tone suggested otherwise. "Will you have some wine, brother?" Eitan hesitated. "Ordinarily I would thank you, but decline, my lady. Today I think I will take up your kindly offer. The Lord will forgive me, I hope." She signaled to one of her ladies. "Then be seated, please." As Eitan turned to look for a suitable chair, the princess saw the raw red marks on his cheek for the first time. "Merciful Alicia! Surely those are fresh wounds on your face. Are you badly hurt, brother? What happened?" He reached his hand up to his scratches. In the strangeness of being sent to the mother of the air, he had forgotten them. "Oh, nothing of import, your Highness. An ill woman I was treating became confused and violent." She gave him a shrewd look, perhaps guessing that Passavali's absence might have something to do with the patient in question. "I'll have one of my ladies tend those, by your leave." "Oh, they are truly nothing to worry about." "Still—" She signaled to a dark-haired woman who put down her sewing and left the room. "Bega is skilled in healing. She trained with a northern Vallada woman. Here is the wine." As the young woman brought in the tray, cups, and ewer, then filled them, Eitan watched the princess. Poised and upright in her dark green gown, Idela had beautifully smooth, pale skin and delicate hands and wrists to go with her slender, pretty face. A sprinkling of freckles on her nose and bosom had been obscured by powder, but the heat of the day rendered the disguise less effective. Eitan realized he was staring at the creamy expanse of flesh above her bodice and felt himself flush. Idela gave no sign she had noticed, except what might have been the wisp of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Let us drink the health of the king and queen," she said. "And their safe return." Eitan took what he hoped was a dignified sip and was astonished at how many flavors he could taste. This was certainly not the sour stuff he and his brothers drank at the refectory table on feast nights, nor the over-sweetened Nabani sack he had occasionally shared at the archbishop's table. He took another longer swallow. "Here is Bega," the princess said. "Loosen your cowl, brother. It is a privilege to give aid to a man of God." Already the young Rimmer's woman was running her cool fingers on his cheek, gently touching the long scratches. To cover a new rush of heat to his face, Eitan took another drink. "My lady is too kind." "Nonsense. I wish we could help Lord Passavalis as well. You said he has had a wearying day."
I think every day for him is wearying, Highness. His responsibilities are great, especially in the absence of the king and queen.
Ah, yes, I miss them both so. She sipped from her own cup, and her tongue came out for a moment to take a drop left on her lower lip. When she noticed him looking, she smiled shyly. The young Rimmer's woman was rubbing something onto Eitan's cheek, and the sting was strangely mixed with a growing chill where the skin had been scraped. "And my dear son Morgan, of course," Idela said. "God grant that he comes back safe as well."
"We all keep him in our prayers, Highness, always. And your daughter, too. Surely it is some comfort to have Princess Lilia with you."
"Lilia? Yes, certainly." But this seemed to distract her. "May I ask you a question, brother? Do you know Lord Passivales well?"
"Well, I would not say so, Highness. I sometimes help him with some minor matters."
But as he said it, Eitan thought that sounded small and foolish, as though he were the sweeper of the Lord Chancellor's chambers.
"I have some gift with numbers and letters. Lord Chamberlain Jeremias calls on me from time to time as well."
"I am certain he does. A man of learning is a jewel whose sparkle pleases many, even if he belongs only to God." She smiled, and this time it was full and broad. "Tell me a little about Passivales, though. He is always so busy. I have scarcely had a chance to speak with him in all the years I have been here. I'm told he is a very good man."
"Oh, yes, Highness. So everyone says, and so I have found it myself."
He thought of the events of only an hour past, Passivales struggling to preserve the life of a woman that some would look on as a treacherous, uncanny danger, no matter the fondness the royal couple were said to have for the Scythe.
"He is a good man."
"But his life, it has been hard, has it not? I have heard stories."
"I do not know the tales, Highness,"
he said with less than complete candor. Eitan was beginning to feel as though something was going on that he did not understand, and he also realized that the wine had gone to his head, making everything in the room seem to bend toward him, including Princess Idela's fine green eyes fixed attentively on his. Also, the dark-haired woman, Bega, was still dabbing soothing unguent on his face, a strange mixture of pain and pleasure which made Eitan shiver.
"Truly, my lady, I am a dull tool to discover the Lord Steward's history. I can claim no special knowledge except of his kindness."
He forced himself to sit straighter. Bega at last ended her ministrations, and at a signal from her mistress, packed up her jars and took her basket out of the room.
"But it is opportune that you mention history."
He swallowed the last of his wine without thinking, then suppressed a wince when the princess directed that it be filled again. Eitan swore to himself that he would drink no more, no matter how good it was.
"God hates drunkards," he reminded himself, "because they make themselves beasts in his eyes, rejecting his most precious gifts. Lord Passivales tells me that you have some books of your late husband's, and seek some advice on their worth."
She looked amused by his attempt to rally himself. "Ah, you are a dutiful servant of your lords, both temporal and divine, brother Eitan." While he picked his way through this compliment, she rose and, with a gesture he did not see, dismissed her maids from the room. "Come with me, then, brother. I see that you are one of those excellent, frustrating men who cannot rest while a task remains undone. No wonder you are one of God's chosen workers." He wished it were entirely so, but he felt uncomfortably certain the faint sheen of perspiration on Princess Idela's breastbone, and the sway of her walk as she led him into the next room would never so easily distract a soul whose only thought was to serve God. "Frailty, thou art man," he told himself, quoting St. Agar. "Distraction, thou art woman." To his dismay, he discovered he was still carrying his recently filled wine cup. "In here, brother," she said. "I had a few of the newer ones brought to me. In my husband's old chamber, his study, there are dozens more, many of them close to ruin, simply from age, and I feared to move them. But I would also like to keep at least a few to remember my dear John Josua." Of course, lady." He could not help noticing that none of the ladies in waiting had followed them into the intimate chamber, clearly the princess's dressing room, as the one table held a standing mirror and an array of jewelry boxes. The room was paneled in velvet, so that it felt like as though he was being cradled in soft gloves. His face felt warm again. He started to take another sip, then thought better of it. "There," she gestured to a chest set against the wall with a woven Hernestiri blanket thrown over it, perhaps so it could be used as a seat. "Please see if any of them should be given to the great library Lord Tiamak is building in my husband's name. I know nothing of such things and can scarcely read any of them. Most are in Nabani, but some are in writing such as I have never seen." She shuddered. "I told my dear John Josua he closed himself too much away in dark rooms with old words. But it was his joy, God preserve him." "God preserve him," Eitan echoed, then knelt down beside the chest. He was finding himself a bit clumsy. It took him long moments to fold the cloth neatly and set it aside, and his fumbling movements were made worse by the knowledge that the slender princess was standing behind him, watching. He worked the clasp open and lifted the lid. The chest was indeed full of books, a dozen or more, although at first glance he saw nothing much older than perhaps a century or two, and most were much more recent, a random assembly of history and old romances from what he could see, and Tully's battles, the tales of Sir Emeton, and others just as unexceptional. Let me read that again. Anatolia's battles, the tales of Sir Emeton, and others just as unexceptional. Eitan himself owned a well-thumbed copy of A True History of the Erkenlandish People, and while it was nothing like this edition, bound in calfskin and its pages copiously illustrated, the words were no different. Thus the great truth, first proposed by Vaxo of Harcha: "Even the rich and noble cannot read words that have not been written, and the poor man who can read may sup on those that are written just as well as a prince." Then Eitan saw something at the bottom of the chest that made him pause. He moved the copy of Placinin that covered it, then lifted it out. Its binding was blackened and cracked with age. For a long moment, as he gently opened it, he did not believe, and his thoughts bounced wildly in his head like a spilled basket of hazelnuts. "I am drunk," he thought. "Surely I am drunk and seeing things that are not there." But there it was, written in careful script across the first page in archaic Nabani letters: "Tractat Aeteris Vocinin," a treatise on the etheric whispers. It had to be a mistake. No, a trick, some kind of counterfeit. Eitan had only heard of one copy of Fortis's infamous book, and that was held deep in the bowels of the Sancellan Adenitis under the jealous eyes of the censor priests. How could there be a copy here, in the Hayhold, as if it were merely another courtly love poem or a disquisition on the best use of arable land? The fumes of wine fled him as if blown away by a sharp winter wind. Eitan's hands were shaking. He did his best to hide it by closing the book.
This one is of some interest, Princess, and some of the rest may also be. I will confer with my superiors if you will permit me to take this with me. Since it was your husband's, God rest him, I shall guard it with my life.
She waved her hand carelessly. The princess almost seemed disappointed, as if she had been hoping for more from his reaction. As you see fit, brother. It is all meaningless to me. Of course you may take it.
Please take good care of them all, Highness.
His heart was beating very fast. The book in his hands seemed as heavy as marble.
At least until I have a chance to talk to others who know old books better than I do. And perhaps it would be useful at some point to examine the rest of his collection as well.
Pause for a second. Yeah, I've only got another couple paragraphs left to read, so I'm going to finish those. Of course. And if they are of some value, perhaps Lord Passavales would like to see them too. Feel free to bring him with you next time.
Thank you, Highness. It could be some of these will be a boon to the scholars who will one day flock to use your husband's library.
The princess's pale skin and strong whine, her pretty laughing ladies, the cool fingers on his cheek, none of them meant anything to Eitan at this moment. He made his farewells as quickly and graciously as he could and left her, the book clutched against his chest. As he hurried down the corridor, it felt almost as if he held a burning hot coal to his chest instead of an old book. This infamous, dark thing, banned by Mother Church and spoken of in hushed tones by scholars for hundreds of years, and now it was clutched in his own hand. Could it be true? Who could he tell? The Archbishop? He would not dare bring such a thing to him. Jervis was a good, pious man who would order the whole chest full of books burned without further exploration, simply to protect the faithful. And Master Tiamak was still several Senites from returning to the castle. But could Eitan keep it secret so long? Who else could be trusted? More important, he wondered, would God himself understand and forgive Eitan's fascination? Or was he holding not just a book, but his own damnation? And that's the end of the chapter. So that's where we're going to end. Chapter 16, A Layer of Fresh Snow, comes next. So with that, and with having spent a lot of time tonight talking about the state of play of various things, we are finished for the evening for the reading. So without further ado, I will say thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your support in general. It's always very, very, very much appreciated. And I will be back at 7 p.m. later today. I still never get used to that idea, but it is later today, since it's now 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. And then I'll be back as far as I know. Wait, what is next week? Next week, is that going to be Christmas? I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'll leave an announcement for you. I still don't know if we're going anywhere for Christmas or not. So everything is up in the air. Everything is higgledy-piggledy, willy-nilly, upsy-downsy, supercalifragilisticexpialidociously nuts. So I will let you know when I know what I know. But until then, what I do know for certain is that I am grateful for your company. I hope you will all take good care of yourselves and your loved ones, your friends and neighbors. And we will all stumble on together and try and figure out this odd thing we call life. So thanks again. Peace and good night.